Hi everyone, this is Lee Gambin, film historian and author, and I'm here with the excellent Mr. Jeff Bergman, who voiced George Jetson and Mr. Spacely in Jetsons the movie. So we're very happy to have him on board. How are you, Jeff?
I'm doing very well, Lee. Thank you so much for having me. This is pretty cool.
Excellent. Thank you for being part of the release. It's really good to have you. So I wanted to start off with 1990 as a year for you, Jeff. It's a very busy year. So you had performed the voices of Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck in the great anti-drug PSA cartoon special cartoon All Stars to the Rescue, which I love. I just completed a book all about very special episodes on TV sitcoms, and there's a piece on that as well because all those moralistic cartoons were happening at that time. And you did Bugs Bunny as well as Tweety and Porky Pig on the Earth Day special cartoon as well. So there's a lot of sort of PSA sort of style cartoons happening. Plus doing their voices as they appeared in Joe Dante's Gremlins 2 as well. So this was the same year that the Jetsons movie came out. Can you talk about these jobs prior to Jetsons the movie? Because you were very busy and doing these
Oh,
classic characters.
and doing it, I was only 10 years old in 1990, so I don't know how I did it when I think about it. Oh, I'll tell you what, Lee. 1989 was really a turning point for me because Mel Blanc had passed away, and it was oddly enough, eerily enough, on my birthday. And approximately maybe 3 to 4 weeks after they began casting for Tiny Toons, Steven Spielberg's Tiny Toon
Mm-hmm.
Adventures. So I started to audition for those characters, and I think the first voice I booked, I think was Elmer Fudd, and then I got Bugs Bunny and booked Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and Foghorn Leghorn and Yosemite Sam and Sylvester and Tweety and Porky. So I was doing probably the lion's share at the outset of the Looney Tunes characters revival for Tiny Toon Adventures, and then not too long after that, I was directed by the Chuck Jones
Mm.
for the Gremlins 2 title sequence, and that was I was really nervous on that one because here's the man that created Daffy Duck, created Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner, and I came in and I was, you know, I was excited, but it's like this is the guy, and he had, if I tell you, like an encyclopedia, the thickness of an encyclopedia, if people even know what that looks like anymore, of storyboards for
Wow.
just 3 minutes worth of dialogue.
Amazing.
So we looked at every single storyboard and went through all that for just three and a half minutes worth of dialogue. So anyhow, it was so much fun to do that and to be able to be directed by him. And then I think it was the wrap session of the first season on Tiny Toons, and Steven Spielberg came in and he met some of the cast, and he had given me a model sheet and signed it to Jeff. Mel would be proud, Steve Spielberg.
Oh.
And he shook my hand, and I thought, is any of this like real? Is it
Right.
really happening? So that's how things were really starting off. It was a really busy year. Bugs Bunny had just turned 50 in 1990, so it was a lot of advertising and celebrations and specials and live events. So it was really cool to be a part of that. And I even got to meet Friz Freeling as well.
Wow.
So it was an amazing start to the year. And
It's
this is all prior to Jetsons the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so incredible. Also, we all grew up with these cartoons, and you did too. So, how exciting is it to sort of play these roles? Like, what's that feeling like? What was the first recording session when you did say Bugs Bunny? What was that like? Like, what was? Oh, you mentioned that you were nervous, of course, working for someone like Chuck Jones, but what was it like, that whole idea of stepping into that booth and recording a character that you've grown up with as a kid, and much loved characters as well?
I don't even know if I was processing it at the time because I kept thinking about people that were fans, just like I was growing up, and trying to just keep it as authentic as I could. And that was what I was trying to focus on. I think as I got into the Tiny Toons episodes, and then we recorded Box Office Bunny, which was a 3-minute cartoon, the first actual cartoon that Warner Brothers had recorded in 27 years.
Mhm.
I think after the studio shut down in 60, I think 64, they stopped making, the 6 minute, 7 minute shorts.
Mhm.
So, um, that was a lot of fun to do because I did Bugs, Daffy, and Elmer in that 3 minute cartoon. And I think I started to, it started to sink in like, you're doing this. This is real. And you better do a good job because you're messing with people's childhood. So I think I kind of felt the weight of that on me, and I don't think it wasn't until years later, maybe into the 2000s, when there was a resurgence and there was a new reboot of the Looney Tunes show that I really started to began to enjoy it. But it wasn't for many years. I just think I felt like, wow, this is a lot to step into. Mel Blanc was, I mean, I don't, there wasn't anybody before him. He started it all with voiceovers.
That's incredible. So in 1981, you had met the legendary Mel Blanc. What was that experience like, and what eventuated out of that initially with meeting him?
That was just, well, I don't know that if you want to call it. Some people say it's fate, serendipity. I was just dawdling, walking around the University of Pittsburgh campus, doing kind of what I usually would do, midday nothing, and I had my headphones on, and I see a sign that says Mel Blanc appearing at David Lawrence Hall, which was our little auditorium for guest speakers, and I thought, oh, Mel Blanc, cool, Bugs Bunny. So maybe I'll check that out. And I went, and he did a performance for all the kids, for all the students. It was great. He brought about 5 or 6 cartoons. He did a bunch of voices, had a Q&A at the end, and afterwards there was this really great reception in our student union for him. And so he signed autographs, and he was just the coolest guy. And I thought, it'd be so cool to meet him, but there were so many students, so I just didn't even think about it. But about an hour or so after the event, I found out he was staying at a motel that they frequently would put guests up in, that was down the street from the university. So, I mean, when I think about today what I did, I mean, I basically stalked the guy. But I didn't think about it at the time. And found out what room he was staying at, and it was about 10 o'clock at night. I knocked on the door, and I hear this voice, and the voice says, just a jiffy. And I thought, oh my God, that's it, that's him. And he opened the door, and he was in a red, like a cordovan type of a bathrobe, and he had a gold necklace on. It was the Hebrew letter Chai, and it was on around his neck. And I said, Mr. Blank, I'm just a huge fan of yours. I saw your lecture at University of Pittsburgh. If I could just spend 2 minutes with you, it would just mean everything. And he said to me, are you Jewish or Italian?
Right.
And I thought, well, what's going to get me in? So I said, well, I'm Jewish. And he said, come on in. So, he was so nice. I mean, we sat down on those 2 little twin beds that are in those typical rooms, and we talked for maybe 45 minutes or so. I even did voices for him. He asked me to do some voices.
Wow.
And at that time, I didn't really know what direction I wanted to head into. I mean, I knew it was going to be something in the entertainment field, but I just wasn't committed to anything. And he said, Jeff, look, stay in school, do the best you can, and if you ever come out to Los Angeles, look me up. So, I mean, I had no idea that really was a turning point, that moment for me, because meeting somebody that does something that you do, that you kind of connect to, that you relate to in some way, it just makes you feel like, oh, maybe I could do that. I mean, that's possible. That was a watershed moment for me, I think.
Absolutely.
As the day.
So beautiful, and like, yeah, you're exactly right. It's a massive legacy, and he was, one of the first. It's these people who sort of, basically initiated this whole wave and this movement and this whole art form, which now people sort of take for granted, really. And it's such a beautiful legacy to sort of take the baton and carry it on. It's really wonderful, and that meeting just, gave me chills just hearing you talking about it. What were some of the main things that you admired about his work as a voice actor? He did a plethora of characters. What were some of the most admired aspects of his work and how he handled characters, and some of your favourite characters that he would perform? throughout his career.
Well, I think for me, I think I was first introduced to him because my parents were, especially my dad was a big fan of the Jack Benny show, and
Right.
he was one of the guest players, as you know, on the Jack Benny program.
Hmm.
So getting to see him was really kind of interesting because they had a lot of character actors on there, Frank Nelson and Phil Harris, and so Mel always he was the plumber, he was Mr. Fix-It, he was the music guy. I mean, he was always a very exaggerated type of a character, and of course, he did the famous sketch with Jack Benny, "See, Size, Sue." So, it was something kind of interesting. Just looking at him, he was just he was a very exaggerated kind of a character in the way that he looked. He kind of looked kind of humorous. So I think that was my first connection. And then it was only thereafter that, oh, he's the voice of Bugs Bunny and Barney Rubble and all these, I mean, characters that, and I didn't associate those two things. So I would say, I mean, when he was, whether it was on the Jack Benny program or any TV show that he happened to be a guest star on, he pushed the boundaries. He made, when he got into a role or a character, I mean, he just took a bite out of it and exaggerate, push the envelope with what you could do. And of course, animation, that was the perfect medium for him.
Definitely, absolutely. Also, in leading up to 1990 and the Jetsons movie, just a bit about George O'Hanlon. Were you a fan of George O'Hanlon's work? Because I was a big fan of the old Joe McDoke shorts. You know So You Want to Be an Actor? Those kind of wonderful
Yes.
those shorts.
Yeah.
Were you a fan of those? And what was your introduction to George O'Hanlon as an actor prior to doing George Jetson?
It's really funny, Lee, because I didn't come to know the Joe McDokes, those episodes, until much later, many years later. I
Mm-hmm.
discovered them, and it's very strange when you don't know what someone looks like, and
Mm.
you hear, and so I would hear that voice come out of him, and I would say, "All right, now look, this is what we're gonna do." And I heard that, and I thought, "Gee, that sounds like somebody." Oh
Wow.
my God, that's George O'Hanlon. Oh my God. And I think it was an episode of the 1950s television series Superman. Oh no, it was an I Love Lucy episode. That's it. And he was a guest star on I Love Lucy, and he just played, I think, one of Little Ricky's friend's father. I think in one of the episodes.
Hmm.
And so I heard his voice, and I said, oh, "That's George Jetson. That's George Jetson." So it was that kind of thing, discovering him, and then his reads. I mean, he was so natural. I mean, his acting was incredible on the Jetsons. But I think what really got me, what really I connected with him more than any character on that show, was that it was real. I believed that he was like a dad, and he
Mm.
was real.
Mm.
It wasn't it wasn't like a Daffy Duck or a Bugs Bunny, which are great characters, but they were put on Mickey Mouse. They're put on type voices, and that was his voice. He was a real guy. So I think that just it made it so much more believable, and I think that's what I connected. And then of course I fell in love with Mr. Spacely, which is obviously Mel Blanc's creation. So um, I mean, that show was really magical for me, the Jetsons. Although having it, I think the first year was 62, right? 1962 for the Jetsons.
Hmm.
I believe for their first season. I mean, I was only a couple years old, so I saw it in syndication.
Hmm.
But I mean, that was my jam. That was what I grew up with. So
Absolutely.
Dawes Butler, Mel
Yeah.
Blanc, George O'Hanlon, Don Messick, and these are the titans of the voiceover industry.
Definitely. And playing with tropes of the sitcom and, being more than just sort of the I guess the polar opposite to the Flintstones because they're totally different shows, I think. They read differently. And you're so right with George O'Hanlon really embodying the kind of everyday guy, isn't he? He's like the sort of working Joe. He's kind of like, this neurotic stressed out, highly strung guy who's trying to keep things together and trying to be the best provider he can be. So it's kind of it's an interesting take, very different to Fred. Very much a different counterpart to Fred Flintstone. But,
Very different, very different. Yeah, I mean, he was the long-suffering employee, always trying to, to kind of worm a raise out of his boss, Mr. Spacely, and to always try to get away on vacation and never really getting away with it, actually. So yeah, I definitely related that to that character, and I don't know why. I was so young, but there just was something. I mean, again, when we look at the technology that's in that show, I mean, the fact that there's Mr. Spacely on the screen catching him, yelling at him. I mean, it's that Zoom, that's
yeah.
FaceTime. That's they knew somehow they figured it out that was going to be the future. So I think that was so cool. The fact that it was a futuristic show.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was a dream. So growing up with Hanna-Barbera cartoons, then finally meeting the two icons of the morning cartoon world must have been something. I mean, meeting Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera, that would have been, a major deal for anyone working with them or working with in the realm of cartoon film. So how did you meet them? What was the initial meeting like? And also, how did you feel they worked as a team, individually, just from your perspective, coming in and being brought in to do the fill-in voices after sadly George O'Hanlon and Mel Blanc had passed?
Well, I first had to audition for both George Jetson and Mr. Spacely. So, I mean, it's 30 years ago. Or over that. It's hard to remember what the audition process
Right.
was, but it took a little time. I mean, not that. It wasn't like 6 months or a year, because I think they had to. There were, as I recollect, they had scenes that had not dialogue that hadn't been recorded yet that needed to be animated, and then there was dialogue that they did record, but they didn't finish it all. So I had to actually do some automatic dialogue replacement ADR work. So I had to do both things, and I just remember the most exciting thing was getting the call from my agent, and I was going to go to 3400 Cahuenga Boulevard, which is where the Hanna-Barbera studios were located. And I thought, you've got to be kidding me. So I think I must have, did I rent a car? I can't remember. But once I got to the studio, you walk in, and there was a reception area there, and on the wall was this giant, beautiful colored billboard of Fred Flintstone and Yogi Bear and Huckleberry Hound, and a picture of Joe Barbera, Bill Hanna, and Joe Barbera in with the characters. Very cool. So that was the first thing that you saw, and what you were looking at when you were in the waiting room, waiting to come into whatever office or studio. So, in a million years, I never imagined that I would meet Bill Hanna. I mean, that's of Hanna-Barbera. Like, well, that's not going to happen. That'll be a director or whatever. So I come in, and there I am in the studio that they recorded the Flintstones and Jetsons and Huckleberry Hound and Yogi Bear. So it was, in itself, it was like going into a museum, a time warp, because even the studio looked like a little bit from a different time. But, I mean, if you have a great formula, you just don't mess with that. So once I got settled in the studio, met everybody, I got the script and the dialogue and get set up on the mic, and in walks Bill Hanna.
Wow.
Mr. Hanna walks in, and he must have been, at the time, I'm just guessing, in his 70s, I guess, early, late 70s. And he was, very on top of it. He was with it and sharp, and he sat down right in the front, and he started to do some of the direction, because these are his babies. These were his characters. So I remember I was, at first I was a little bit, I was a little nervous, because I didn't expect that was going to happen. But I relaxed a little bit and got into it, and it became a little bit more fun. I don't ever recollect meeting Joe Barbera, but what I did have the experience of is, after I met Bill Hanna, the coolest thing happened. We had a follow-up session, and who would you think would be in that follow-up session was Penny Singleton, who of course was Jane Jetson. And Penny was the sweetest thing, spunky, I mean, fiery as all get, and she was so much fun. And and again, of course, my first connection to Penny was watching those little Blondie serials as a kid.
Yep.
and that she was Blondie, and so I'm like, oh my god, that's Blondie. So I mean, you're geeking out, you're nerding out, you're trying to be professional, and of course I was, and she was so complimentary. My God, she said, "Oh, you sound so much like George," and I said, "Well, thank you, Penny." I said, I just can't believe I'm here to do this with you." And she was, I mean, she was great. She sounded the same. And then in walks Jean Vanderpyle,
Oh.
who, as you well know, Wilma Flintstone, Rosie the Robot, and I had actually worked with Jean. I would work with her in about 4 or 5 years later in a Fruity Pebbles, Cocoa Pebbles commercial
Right.
when she was Wilma in one of the commercials. So she was just so sweet and so much fun to work with. So there I am surrounded by these two voiceover titans, and they just couldn't have been they couldn't have been nicer. I mean, they were so much fun to work with. So I really kind of felt like, oh, I feel a little bit like I'm part of history, kind of a little bit. Although I don't think I thought of it that way, but now I certainly look at it that way. So that was maybe those were probably the two coolest experiences related to the Jetsons, the movie.
That's beautiful. It's funny just hearing you talk about it and like going into Hanna-Barbera Studios for the first time and seeing that big mural with all the characters, and then working alongside people like Penny Singleton and Jane Vanderpyle, amazing legends. How do you distinguish going from, because for me Saturday morning cartoons and Hanna-Barbera are such a comfort thing, like a warm blanket. You go back to that childhood memory, in front of your television, bowl of cereal, beautiful cartoons for like a good half of the day. And then sort of shifting that focus and that sort of memory and that nostalgia trip to actually becoming work. Like you know what I mean. Like how does that work and tick over in your brain? Like how you go, oh my god, this is now my career. So this is kind of a little bit daunting. The lost history or the past history of me being a kid growing up and enjoying the Jetsons as a spectator is now shifted into me actually voicing for these characters. Like how does that sort of compute in the brain?
I tell you, Lee, I mean, the only way I think I could approach it, I had to approach it differently than they did because they created the characters, and
Mm.
they both Mel Blanc and George O'Hanlon were a part of the radio, the comedy golden age of
Mm.
radio. So that wasn't something I could relate to. I had to connect to it in a way similar to what you said, which is just growing up with this and sitting in front of a TV with chocolate milk and cheese doodles and watching Flintstones, Jetsons, Yogi. So that was how I connected to it. And I think in retrospect, looking back, why did I even approach any of those roles? What made me want to do it? I think maybe to prolong my childhood. It's probably the most accurate thing I think I could come up with is that I just didn't want to let that go. And so, and of course, I mean, I was really bummed when these guys passed away because you just don't think that
Mm.
your childhood heroes they're always going to be there. They're always going to continue.
Mm.
So, and I don't think I thought of myself yet as like a voice guy. I was still kind of more of a fan, but I think I brought as much of that childhood love for those characters as that I could at that time. But I certainly didn't have a tremendous amount of professional experience.
Hmm. And it's beautiful because what you represent is the fact of the matter that these characters will live forever. Do you know what I mean? There's this, like you said, these legends like Mel Blanc and George O'Hanlon. You never think of them passing away, and for that matter, people like Penny Singleton and Jean Vanderpyle, etc. But the characters live on, and thankfully, voice artists continue to work and give them life. Moving forward. So that's something that you should be totally proud of, and it's such a beautiful part of what you've done in this legacy and in this wonderful canon of cartoon voiceover work. It's beautiful.
Well, it's funny, Lisa. When I was actually called in to do George and Mr. Spacely for the film,
Hmm.
I was 30 at the time, so I 29, 30. So my voice was still very young, and I don't know if George was a smoker. He might have been, but certainly Mel was a pretty good smoker, and because of that, it gave his voice so much.
Raspy, yeah.
texture, and it gave it, grit, and gave it some age.
Mm.
So he was in his early mid 50s when I think they both were in that age group when they did the first run in the early 60s. So my voice wasn't anywhere near that mature yet. So now I'm about the age, just a little bit older than they were in the early 60s. So now my voice sits in just the right. And I just laugh when I think about it. Now my voice is really in the right register, age range, texture for those voices. So I did kind of laugh about that.
Amazing. So your personal thoughts on cartoon series becoming feature films. I remember when the film came out, and in Australia here we had obviously the '80s reboot of the Jetsons, and then they reran the '60s series again. So it was in the sort of cultural zeitgeist, I guess. Cartoon networks would have these shows running, which was stunning, and it was all these Hanna-Barbera stuff was populated the television airwaves for the whole decade of the '80s. And then leading up into 1990, the film comes out, and it was a big deal because I always personally loved seeing small screen stuff adapted for big feature film on the big screen, and also not tampering it with it that much. Like the designs were very much the same. Obviously, there was introduction of CGI, etc., and rendering, etc. But the characters pretty much looked the same, so it was kind of exciting to see them on the big screen. What were your thoughts on cartoon series becoming feature films, and also your thoughts on the wave of '90s movies being based on classic sitcoms and stuff? There was a whole bunch of them: The Addams Family, The Brady Bunch. It was all sort of popping up. It was like a big sort of nostalgia trip, honouring the '60s. What were your thoughts there in regards to that wave?
Well, I mean, I think it was really exciting because I think Roger Rabbit, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I mean, that really started off
Mm.
the animation in television and feature film craze. So when that film came out, whoa, I mean, that was incredible. I mean, it was live action and animation. So after that, that was 1988. So then shortly after that, it was Steven Spielberg's Tiny Toon Adventures. So that, and then after that, it was Animaniacs. I mean, it was the animation revolution of the 90s, and then I do remember there was the Ghostbusters TV series, that, because I mean, obviously that was a big film series, and then Adam's Family, as you mentioned. So I mean, it was exciting, it was fun, and so I think by the time we got to do the Jetsons, I thought, whoa, this is amazing. And then seeing the graphics, that it was so reminiscent of the show. They didn't want to change. They didn't mess with the opening.
Mm.
It was the same. I think it was Universal Pictures,
Hmm.
right? I think that. So I mean, it was like, oh my God, I'm going to be in a movie in some way. I mean, uh, yeah, it was incredible. And I remember at the time, Tiffany she was like the big pop singer at the time. So that was cool that she's going to be in the film. I think the character that I missed was Janet Waldo, who played
Mm.
Judy Jetson,
So I want
and
to
I
talk
didn't.
about that actually, because that's
I
a big state. That's a big sort of a point of contention with the film. A lot of critics, animation historians, were kind of a bit annoyed that Tiffany was cast over Janet Waldo for the role of Judy. And there's a sort of idea that Tiffany should have been hired simply for the songs, and Janet Waldo sort of gets relegated in the background. I think she plays the secretary to Spacely, the robot secretary. So what were your thoughts there? Because I know Andrea Romano was not very happy about that casting choice. So yeah, did you have any opinions there, or do you now in retrospect?
Well, whenever you see something, it doesn't matter what it is. If it's a TV commercial, if it's a film, a television show, and the setup is, oh, that's your childhood. So immediately you go back to that little kid in you with your cereal and your little pajamas in front of the TV. And so that's what it was like. I thought that she was going to be in the film, especially since I worked with Penny Singleton, and Gene Vanderpyle. So I thought for sure, and Don Messick. I think Don was in the film as well,
Hmm.
oh yes, Don was in the film because he did Astro, the voice of Astro, and I gotten to meet Don, actually, on doing Tiny Toon Adventures, and he was just really a very sweet man. So you kind of expected that, and then not seeing that Judy Jetson. I mean, that was a dynamic that Elroy and Judy had, and they had with
Hmm.
the kids and Jet Screamer. So you kind of expected to see that. So that made it a little bit different, for me. But apart from that, I think they really tried very much to keep it as close to what we remember. The '60s and then the '80s, reboot was.
Yeah, and I think Tiffany does a great job as well. I think she sort of
She
captures.
does, yeah,
Yeah,
it's fun.
and the songs are terrific. "You and Me" is a wonderful song.
It is a great song. It
Yeah.
really is, and I think actually, in some way, it just makes you. Gives you a sense of that era, and I
Mm.
think that's kind of what they wanted to do. They wanted to just make it for, the times. So I mean, I think that's what I think is special about it. So I think I get what they're doing. What they tried to do with that.
Yeah, and I love that Tiffany kind of represents that kind of mall, pop punk rock and roll sensibility, that kind of that shopping mall sort of sensibility, which comes from the Paisley Underground as well. So the Go
Yeah.
Go's and the Bangles and all those great bands like that. That's sort of Tiffany's lineage. That it's really cool.
Yes.
And Judy Jetson is pretty much that. She's the epitome of that sort of mall teenage girl. It's great.
Yes, totally. And of course, I have to give a shout out to Janet. I actually think I might
Mm,
have met her or seen her on a panel or something, and she was so sweet.
yeah.
And she sounded like Judy Jetson when
I
she was when she was in her 70s. She still sounded like Judy Jetson. I mean, to have that kind of a voice.
Oh, she's adorable. And if you've ever got
Yeah.
the DVD set or the Blu-ray set of the Jetsons series, she does a couple of commentaries, and when she does the commentary on the Eek Eek, that great episode, the Date with Jet
Oh
Screamer,
yes.
she's just gorgeous. She's like watching. It's like she's watching it for the first time. It's really
Oh,
beautiful.
I
So
have to
good.
get that now that you said that
Yeah,
because yeah, I don't have that. I have the Flintstones, but I have to get the Jetsons.
yeah, she was a
That com-
wonderful, wonderful, wonderful actress, and sadly no longer with us either. She was the last to go.
yes.
So, just your thoughts on the design of the film. So, just the look of the film, and the introduction of different characters. What was your thoughts on the script, the initial screenplay that you got? What did you feel like it was kind of a good tribute to the Jetsons that you grew up with? Was it something that was sort of trying to sort of take in this sort of modern sensibility? It does have a lot in there about environmentalism and characters and different species and different races working together. So this whole thing about togetherness is embedded in there. What were your thoughts on the sort of the script of the film and the
Well,
mood?
first, I love the look of the film, the animation. I thought it was really bright, and it was just it was a little bit. I mean, of course the original animation was for that era, but then I was a big fan of the '80s reboot. I was really excited when that came out, and I watched those episodes. So then to find out that it's going to be a film, I thought, oh my god, it's great. So seeing it on the big screen, I saw that film on the big screen, and it was cool to see the Jetsons on the big screen. The colors were great. As far as the script goes, it's very interesting. Uh, as far as voice acting goes, on a television show, we often get the script and sometimes even a storyboard. So you really get a sense of the context and the action that's happening in a particular scene. So whether it's a 10-minute cartoon, 5.5 minutes, or even if it's 22 minutes, you get the script. But for a film, there could be 85 to 90 minutes or more of dialogue. So that takes a long time to record. So oftentimes they're still working on the script, Lee. So you don't often get a full script. In many cases, you don't. You just get the scene of that day or the sides that
Hmm.
they may have written, and then they're going to work and try to punch up some of the other scenes. So I never actually saw a full script. So I would come in, and then I had to hear both Mel Blanc and Giorgio Hanlon, and I had to match what they didn't complete. So if there was a line that Mel did and he had a certain intention, they would play it. Bill Hanna would play it for me, and then I had to be able to come in and really match it as close as I could. And let me tell you, that was really hard.
Mm.
That was really hard. So I mean, had I come into it, under different circumstances, I might have gotten a little bit more of a script. I don't know what they got, but that was really tough for me. So it was sort of in bits and pieces that I came there because it was maybe 15 minutes of the film I recollect that they didn't have recorded yet, that
Right.
had to be animated for both George O'Hanlon's George Jetson and Mel Blanc's Mr. Spacely. So it was very difficult to do, to try to match that as close as we could. I mean, I was very young, and these gentlemen were at the kind of the height of their acting career, but their voices were much older, so it was tough to match that.
Absolutely. I was going to ask you, so do you remember specifically what scenes and what sequences you came in to record?
Hmm. Hmm. It's That's a tough one. I'd have to see. I'd have
Yeah.
to even see the film because they did a pretty good job. As I mean, there were
Oh, it's
certain scenes
seamless,
where
yeah.
I could tell, like, oh, okay, that's my, because I know my voice and I
Right.
could tell, and but generally there were some action scenes. I think some yelling, some screaming, some like highly agitated scenes with George and Spacely that I thought, okay, I think that's me doing that. So, but there was a bunch of dialogue, and it's all over there. Um, I'm guessing it's more dialogue towards the end of the film.
Okay.
I would think like towards three-quarters of the film because they finished most of it.
Yeah, right. It's yeah. I feel personally it's seamless. Like, I mean, if you're if you're the person doing it, of course you'd probably pick up, oh, that's me. But yeah, I just feel like yeah, it's pretty seamless. So you did a wonderful job there, Jeff. It's beautiful.
Oh,
Um,
thank you, Lee. Thank you. It
wh-
was so cool to do it. I mean, I often, as any actor, like they express the guys, I go, I wish I could go back now and just do it. And say, Jetson, I want to see you in my office right away, George.
oh,
George Jetson.
it's so cool when you slip into George Jetson and Spacely voices, it chills down my spine. So just so you know, um, what was the mood like? This is a really tragic situation. These two icons of comedy and voice acting, and these two amazing actors have passed. I mean, surely the mood would have shifted. I'm sure Penny and Jean, etc., would have been very devastated, and yeah, so and also the people working on the film. So what was the mood like when you came in to record? I mean, that to me sort of strikes me as something that would be kind of a tricky sort of thing to navigate.
I mean, I think it was really weirdly sad because not only did Mel Blanc pass away and George O'Hanlon, but Dawes Butler, who
Oh
was
yeah.
Elroy Jetson, he passed away,
Mm.
and I think it was within and around that time. So you mean you lost the three big guns um, of that film? So I mean, it was a bummer, actually. But look, it was a job, and they had to get it done, and there was a time issue. It was time sensitive, and you had to get that recorded. And certainly, I'm sure in those days, it took even longer to do the animation than it does even today. So I do remember it was fast. It was I had to get in there and just get it right and just do it. And I didn't have a heck of a lot of time to be nervous. So and I think the fact that I was doing some of the Warner Brothers characters prior to that sort of helped me a little bit. I wasn't completely, totally new to doing ADR and television feature film work, but yet when I saw Bill Hanna, I thought I was gonna, that my head was gonna explode.
There's a moment in the film, it's late in the film, where Alroy confides in George and he says something along the likes of having to leave is very hard. And then George reinstates that sentiment, and the film lingers on his image. Like it sort of stays there for a moment. So it's like this poignant sort of moment, and I get the feeling that it was intended to be a tribute. Do you remember this at all? I mean, you said you haven't seen the film for a while, but do you recall that? It's kind of him saying to Alroy, "Yeah, leaving is very hard," and then it stays there, and you're like, "Ah, that's a nod to the wonderful George."
I don't remember that, but I do remember seeing the film in the theater and thinking, wow, there's a tender quality to this film
Mm.
in some of the scenes that I don't remember. And so, and again, I think that's great. That's just a reflection of the growth of the characters and where they want to take, where how far that they've come. So I don't know if that was, as you put it, if that was homage to, the relationship between both father and son, and of course the actors that could have been done post them, passing away. I don't know. That's a good question. I'd like to know that, but yeah, I do remember thinking that it was really tender. That there were scenes there that were different, and that I like that. I like to see that. It's like the Toy Story moments, that are sweet like that.
Yeah.
That have heart.
I feel
Yeah.
like Hanna-Barbera did that beautifully. They did that nice, all their cartoons have that really nice counterbalance of jokes and slapstick and silly antics, but then this real sentiment. I'm a big sook. I get teary-eyed, misty-eyed watching any kind of cartoon.
They
There's,
do.
yeah.
I mean, it's true. I mean, you always knew Fred and Wilma were going to make up. They were going to be
Yeah.
husband and wife. They loved their family, the kids. They were always going to be together. The same thing with George and
Mhm.
Jane. You knew they were going to figure it out and they were going to stay together. I
Yeah.
mean, even the Simpsons, they've done that as well. So that's I love that. That's what kind of I think makes these characters real for us
Mhm.
because they have real people problems.
Yeah, and just talking about the Jetsons film, we touched on the look. We talked about the look about the film. We touched on the themes, but the themes. What were your thoughts about the themes in the film? The idea, its interest in environmentalism and different cultures living together in harmony, and how cartoons. You worked on the aforementioned PSA cartoons like the drug one, etc. How do you feel about cartoons and animated features during that period of the early 90s having a social message? Did you feel like it was probably too heavy-handed, or was it sort of nicely done in certain vehicles, like the Jetsons movie?
I'll tell you, I thought it was really cool
Mm.
because we had not seen that kind of thing before, so it was interesting. I remember when it was we did Cartoon All Stars to the Rescue. Now I didn't work with George C. Scott, who was the voice of Smoke. He was the drug influence,
Yeah.
and of course he was so brilliant in that role. Oh my God, he was really scary, creepy, and he was the devil in that role. So, I mean, I thought it was so much fun because, I mean, it's a lot better having cartoon characters that are beloved by children, being a little bit preachy than your mom and dad or your teachers. So, that was kind of cool, and I think they handled it really. I think they handled it great. I mean, it's what we were going through. I mean, that was part of the time period. So as long as it doesn't get too serious, because then I think it gets a little too far away from the fun. Because that's where I'm a little bit torn. Is that we want to go to the theater to escape, and we want to be entertained, and maybe not think about everything that we're going through today.
Right.
So that was the only. But I felt that what they did for the Jetsons film, I thought that was it was still fun. It was still silly. It was still about music, and I just remember the Tiffany craze, and I do recollect that there was an environmental aspect to the film, and I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, absolutely, and I love that you get to play George and Spacely. You've got the sort of reluctant hero who becomes like a hero to the indigenous race of the grungies, and also a family guy, but then also Mr. Capitalist. So you get to play those two polar opposites, which is great.
Absolutely, and those were always my two favorite characters on the Jetsons. Yeah, I don't know. Somehow I connected to both of those characters. So, and actually many years later, in I think it was the WWE meets the Jetsons, I got to voice both of them again, and that was just a few years ago. So I was able to revisit those characters. So I'm in love with both of those characters.
Cool. So how do you work yourself into working through those characters? How do you build up the energy needed to portray George or Spacely? So what's the process there for you personally when you get into the heads of those two characters?
Well, I don't know what other voice actors go through, but for me, I'll just sit down and I'll just start from the first episode and whatever I can get my hands on. I mean, I used to go to the Museum of Broadcasting in New York, and you could go in there and you could look at any television show in the history of television.
Wow.
And so I would listen. And what was cool is not only would I watch an episode of the Jetsons, but you'd see the commercials in between. So you transport yourself back into that era, into that time as a kid. So I'd sit there and I'd be in the Museum of Broadcasting for the 5 hours watching Flintstones, Jetsons, you name it, Beverly Hillbillies, whatever. This is all before YouTube, obviously, and we could get all this stuff, and that this stuff to some extent is fairly accessible to us. So that's what I did was just sit there and just revisit, go back in time, and I love seeing all the commercials that go with it. And many times you would even see Fred Flintstone do a Welch's grape commercial,
Yeah.
and so it was whoa! It was like, oh, I'm back home again on Saturdays watching the Jetsons again.
That's great.
So yeah, that makes it a lot of fun for me. That puts me right there in that space.
Excellent. And just the initial release of Jetsons the movie, what do you recall of that? Because I remember it was a big deal. It came out in the same year of things like Dick Tracy. There was a whole bunch of films that sort of were really kind of, the sort of the next wave of kind of big box office hits after following Tim Burton's Batman, which was such a massive deal. And you mentioned Roger Rabbit and things like Little Mermaid. There was a whole big wave of these, I guess, escapist family-centric films that were sort of really doing big bucks. So yeah, Jetsons the movie pops up in there in 1990, sort of holding the banner for Saturday morning cartoons transitioning onto the big screen. So what are your recollections of the film opening and hitting theaters?
Well, I mean, I thought it was incredible. I mean, as soon as you see, they would run like the trailer, the promo on TV, and I'd forget that I had anything to do with the film, and I would hear dun dun dun, dun. I'd be, oh my God, it's the Jetsons. So I mean, it was incredible. Just the fact that you could go, and we were going to go to the movie theater to see that on the big screen. And then, I remember seeing the poster for it.
Mm.
And, oh, wow. And then there was George O'Hanlon and Mel Blanc featured in a larger-than-life, his name. So, I mean, just to see that poster was so cool. And then to go into the theater and to see it, it was amazingly. It was just, it was like it came to life in a different way because we'd only seen it on the small screen. So
Yeah.
it was exciting.
That's awesome. And it's interesting because the initial idea was to do a live action Jetsons film at that period, and they ended up doing the animated feature. But then the Flintstones got their live action adaptation. Did you recall seeing that, and what were your thoughts on that film?
Oh my gosh, I do remember. I remember all of that. And when I heard that they were going to do a live action, I thought, wow, how are they going to do? How do you cast? Because like they hadn't done anything like that before. So how do you cast somebody because they're not real? I mean, they're not real. They're animated. So how do you do that? I loved that they cast John Goodman as Fred Flintstone. I mean, first of all, I think John Goodman is he's one of my favorite actors.
Great.
He's one of the greatest actors of his generation.
Mm.
So, and then he kind of looked a little bit, but he sounded a little like Fred. And I thought he kind of got that. And it was, I mean, I think actually looking at it today, I think I like it, appreciate it even more today. But it was kind of odd because seeing something that's live action that you really want to be animated, I think at the time that was just a little, I don't know, it was hard for me to accept that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think again that was the kid in me that expected to see, like what the Jetsons did, which is to make a feature out of it with really them. So I think I had mixed feelings about it.
Mm-hmm. And what about? I mean, I have mixed feelings about CG. Like, I don't know. Sometimes it just doesn't gel for me. So, thank God, we're back in 1990, and the Jetsons film is, keeping it traditional animation, which is fantastic. But now, say for instance, a new Scooby-Doo film comes out, and it's all CGI and computer generated. It sort of loses the magic. For me personally, it loses that sort of aesthetic magic. That you grew up with as a kid, and that kind of the heart comes through from these wonderful two-dimensional cell cartoons that we all grew up with. So what about your thoughts as a voice actor? I mean, yeah, where do you sit in that realm, in that kind of thought process?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because as a voice actor, if you're supposed to heighten a scene, heighten a line, well, I don't know that that's any different than if the line was recorded by an actor with a heightened sense of anxiety, and that's, whether you recorded in 1960 or 1935 or 1995 or 2015, it's a very similar sense of it's. Or you're supposed to be anxious and excited, and you're running off, but with the animation, I don't think I often understood that, because it's as though, with the Jetsons when they first came out in the early '60s.
Mm.
Well, that was exciting to everybody that was watching it at that age. If you were 9 or 10. But then there's another generation. The technology gets better, and it gets more advanced. So now you're appealing to a new generation. So, and oftentimes now, I think, when you look at video games, sometimes the video games look more like real people than they do animation. It's but there's a quality to it that's animated, but yet it's real. So, but I think that's just something that it's like, who is it? Who are you appealing to? What's the demographic of your audience? What are they accustomed to seeing? And I mean, I guess that's how they have to look at it. Who's going to be buying the tickets here? I mean, even when you look at Toy Story movies, they do look a little different from the very first one. The technology is more advanced, and so I guess maybe they think we, as the audience, we want to see things that look maybe more convincing or more real. I don't know, but ultimately, I think you're always faced with a great story. That's what's really going to stay with us is the great story. Not so much how cool did it look. Yeah, it's a part of it. But was it a great story?
I think a lot the problem sometimes is they try and sort of give these characters an edge, and try to make them a bit more sardonic or make them more sassy when they don't really need to be. So I think with something like the Jetsons movie, thank God, the writing really does play up the actual essence of these characters. Judy is Judy, and Jane is Jane, and Rosie is Rosie. They're not doing something that's doesn't fit their character just to sort of market a specific period in time. Um,
Totally.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
there's an honor, there's a truth to it, so it's really good in that response.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely think so. I mean, there's something that is. I mean, when you look at the Jetsons, like, my memory is the relationships that
Yeah.
George and Jane had with each other and with the children, and so I mean that always stayed intact, and I think that we just kind of expect that. I can't even imagine if the film, when I came into it, if it was really different, if they were different characters, but they weren't. They were who they were. They were who we knew them to be. So that for me made it, you know, it was an honor to be a part of that, and even the smallest way, which I was.
Oh, well, thank you so much for your work. It's an amazing contribution, and it's part of an awesome legacy that lives forever. And thank you, from all the cartoon fans. It's awesome. It's something to be incredibly proud of.
Thank you, Lee. Well, I just would love here for my pal George to say goodbye to you.
Listen, Lee, I just want to thank you very much for doing this commentary, and I think you did a terrific job. And I'm so happy that you're a great fan. But I was wondering if maybe you could try to help me get a raise out of that penny pinching boss of mine, Mr. Spacely. Jetson, I want to see you in my office right away, George Jetson. Why, you're the shiniest gold brick I ever saw, Jetson. Jetson, you're fired!
Very good. That's too much. Thank you so much.
Lee, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. And then please keep me informed when this all comes out. I just can't wait to I can't wait to see it.
Beautiful. We will. Thank you so much, Jeff.
You're welcome, Lee. All right, be well.
See ya. Bye.